So by pursuing art now, in my 30s, I'm finally giving back to that little girl who pointed at Aladdin and said, I want to make those moving pictures. Well, it's been 1 year since I made that video, and I can finally tell that little girl that I did it. I can make those moving pictures. They're scrungly and ugly, but I can do it. And not only that, but after over 70 pages of work, I've created more art in the last year than I have in my entire life. And I fell in love with art in the process. And I just want to talk about how that year went, because a lot of you sent some truly heartfelt comments in that first video. And if any of you are still around from back then, I wanted to let you know that I didn't stop just because I'm not drawing on camera anymore. I especially wanted to touch on what it's been like as a new artist in this age of fake AI that the tech industry is trying so desperately to shove down our throats, because their efforts have changed how we interact with art, and that includes how we go about learning it. Yet despite all that, artists continue to draw and paint and sculpt, or whatever it is that you personally do. And the fact that everyone is refusing to let their light be snuffed out and continue to share their work is a big inspiration to me. So genuinely, if you're an artist watching this, thank you. I know drawing your OCs may feel selfish at times and doesn't sound like something that would help someone else, but watching all of you do what you love has inspired me to keep picking up my pencil or my brush and stylus. And that's a good transition into the first big realization I had this year. And that was, I found that for me personally, finding my style wasn't important, which I'm sure the more experienced of you are thinking, well, no duh, we're tired of having to tell newbies this. I promise I got to that point eventually. But instead, for me, while style wasn't important, figuring out my medium was, or rather what tools I wanted to make art with. And I bring this up because when I first got into art last year, my mind immediately went to drawing. You can see in my first video, I talk about how I've always wanted to learn how to draw, how my parents mentioned that if I wanted to make the pictures I saw in Disney movies like Aladdin and Lion King, I needed to learn how to draw, not animate or paint, draw. Most of the people around me associated visual arts with drawing and only drawing, so that's what my understanding of art became. You want to make cool pictures? You learn to draw. So that's what I did. For the first 7-ish months of this past year, I would pull out my sketchbook and I would draw. And while I'm proud of the sketches I whipped out in that time, there was a distinct feeling that something was lacking. Because so many artists I'm friends with and artists I watch on YouTube talk about the joy of the craft, about loving the process. Yet, I was not loving the process behind drawing. I loved what I was putting out and the progress I was making, but the act of putting pencil to paper itself wasn't making me happy, which led me to gaslighting myself. Maybe I don't want to actually get into art, or maybe this is just my first wall and I'm being a big old brat about it, right? And just things like that. But because I follow so many art YouTubers, I eventually stumbled into a video by Angry Miko titled Art Advice That Changed My Life. I'll be linking all the artists I bring up in this so you can give them some love. But anyway, in that video, he brings up one instructor in his life who helped him realize he sees the world like a painter through shapes and colors rather than outlines, which led to him focusing on painting rather than drawing. And that video kind of gave me an aha moment. Like, what if I'm the same? What if the reason I was struggling and not finding my joy in drawing was because that's not how I view the world? And it kind of tracked once I actually started following that train of thought. Like, not to do my own horn, but I am pretty good at breaking down shapes. And I have to do it all the time when I'm building houses in Final Fantasy XIV. So if I'm allowed to simply make shapes and then build on those shapes, I do learn faster. But once I have to start thinking about outlines and line work, my brain goes completely blank. On top of that, I looked through what types of artists I followed most, and sure enough, the majority of them were painters of some kind, mostly watercolor and gouache painters, to be specific. I do have a friend of mine to thank for that influence, but but the point still stands. Pair that with a really strong desire to work with color that just kept building and building over those 7 months, and I found myself wondering if I should try painting. Now, obviously, I can't run from learning how to sketch basic shapes or be more confident in my marks, especially if I do go into painting. You can't erase paint. But once I took the plunge and got a tablet and played with a more painterly approach, my art took off. All of a sudden, I went from opening my sketchbook out of obligation to get better to constantly picking up my tablet because I wanted to. And I loved the gouache brushes I got into so much that I actually got some real gouache for myself. Yes, I fell down the gouache rabbit hole a few years late to that trend, and that tracks with me too. I tend to pick up on things a little slow or a little late. Sometimes both. But from the very first paint stroke, I finally understood that joy my friends and so many other artists talk about. You know how when you take a blanket or a towel out of the dryer and you wrap it around yourself, the heat gently seeps into you, and for a second, everything feels calm and bright. That's how gouache felt, both traditionally and digitally. It doesn't help that I'm also sensitive with textures, and there's just something about paintbrushes that tickles my brain in just the right way, as a friend of mine would say. Same for drawing on a tablet. Don't come at me, but I like drawing on the smooth glass of my iPad. I cannot begin to explain why. It just feels really nice. So I'm sorry to the Paper Like fans out there. I cannot join you. I like the glass too much. And I'm wondering if maybe that was part of my problem with drawing. Maybe something about the texture of pencil against paper. Maybe something about that wasn't connecting with me correctly. I can't explain it, but I'm glad I have my answer. That all being said, now that I know that I like more of a painterly process, it's actually opened up my sketchbook to be more loose and free. And now I'm enjoying that process more too. I'm finding I enjoy my marks more when I'm confident and loose and energetic rather than trying to be perfect, though I guess that's technically another thing I learned. You've really got to fight your perfectionism. But all of that is to say, circling back to my starting point, I never would have thought to go in this direction with my art if painting never entered my vocabulary. If I had tried to force myself into pencils and inks to draw, I don't think I would have ever developed a love for the craft. If anything, I think I might have come to resent it a little. And I'd still be questioning my drive for wanting to learn how to make pictures, how to do art. So I'm not kidding when I say thank you to all the artists out there that are willing to be specific, that are willing to not only share your work, but to talk about your thought process and the tools behind the works that you make. I am here a year later, more excited than ever because y'all are willing to do that. And that goes for any of my friends watching this too, because I know most of you are digital illustrators. My own journey may be steering me away a little bit from what y'all do, but I love hearing y'all yap and watching you work. So please don't ever stop doing it. And I'll definitely be keeping up digital painting too because of how simple it is to jump straight into it compared to preparing my gouache, but I am looking forward to doing some more gouache lessons. So if there's anything anyone takes away from this video, please let it be this: stop calling yourselves content creators. Just like the people around me associated art with drawing, and I thought drawing was the only thing I could do, if you just tell someone you're a content creator, what are you actually telling them? What is it that you're making? Why are you diluting the beautiful things that you do to content? You're more than that. What you make is more than that. And it's a really simple way to regain your power from corporations that want to AI you into oblivion. And speaking of AI, the second thing I want to talk about was references. And what a bear that's been. Way back, and I think it was my second practice piece I recorded on this channel, I lamented how references were so much harder to find because AI images had overrun everything. And looking back, I was both right and wrong, because that sentiment has only grown, right? I see it on Blue Sky and Kara especially, but what I also see on there, especially on Blue Sky, is a call to return to physical reference books and taking your own reference photos, which I do think is a good idea, and I've been slowly starting to do the same. The photos on my phone, there's like none of me there. It's just a whole bunch of different reference images that I think look cool that I would like to try studying at some point. Will I ever get to it? No, it's getting worse than my Steam backlog, but it's there. Now, of course, the art books you grab don't even have to be how-to books or resource books. If you're into a specific piece of media, like an anime or a TV series or a video game, then odds are high that media has an art book or two somewhere. Now, art books aren't cheap, but they're little treasures to have. Just surrounding yourself with art you love is great for both getting you excited to study and just filling your cup too, because we need that. Part of art is just enjoying it, whether you're the one making it or not. So if an artist you love or a media you adore is releasing an art book or a print, try to snag it if you can. I know that's gonna be hard in the coming years given everything, but try. Consider it a treat for yourself, and you do deserve a treat when you can save up for it. Now that's all well and good, but I have found that if you're wanting to learn to create something that isn't easily attainable for you, then you still have to rely on the internet a bit. Like using myself as an example, I don't have a pet for a variety of reasons. So in wanting to learn how to draw dogs, for example, I needed pictures of dogs. Getting those references online are harder these days in the sense that there's no longer a one-stop shop for them anymore. For what, 10 years? Actually, no, 15 years, because Pinterest released in 2010. What is time? For 15 years, we've gotten used to Pinterest being our one-stop shop for reference images. And that's a really long time. Long enough for many artists like me to not know where to get solid references without it. And I think that's just the problem with the internet as a whole right now at the time of this video. We have 15, or in some cases 20 years. Twitter would have been 20 next year. 20 years of specific apps and websites being central hubs, and now all of that is crumbling down. The internet seems to be splitting back into something echoing what we had back in the 90s and early 2000s. It's not the same. It's not going to be the same. I don't think it's possible for us to ever go back to anything exactly like it, but we're starting to see the formation of something echoing it. So yeah, that's hard. 2/3 of my life has been dominated by these online hubs, so adapting's been a little tough. But all that being said, references can actually still be easy to get online, if not actually easier to get in some ways. We just have to think about individual communities again and where they gather. For example, if you want to learn how to draw pets, like cats, dogs, birds, Reddit is actually still a fantastic resource for those. I mean, think about it. There's a cat sub for literally anything. And the reason for that is most people on those subs aren't trying to get popular or sell a product. They're sharing real, oftentimes really goofy pictures of their cats or their dogs or the birds or whatever, which means you sometimes find really dynamic and scrungly photos you wouldn't find in a reference book. And I think those images are valuable if you want to learn more dynamic posing or more dynamic composition. I want to say camera angles, but I'm not talking about videos, I'm talking about 2D art. And it's the same with interiors. I lurk in interior decorating communities, and the number of genuine, non-curated references that exist in these hubs is amazing. That all being said, I do think it's important that if I use these references, I need to respect the privacy of the people posting them. Just because someone is sharing a photo of their living room or their cat doesn't mean they're okay with someone painting them and using those paintings to build an online presence. I mean, I could be overthinking it, but I think for me personally, I'm more comfortable leaving studies done with those particular types of references in my sketchbook. Now, luckily for me, since I want to learn how to draw interiors and landscapes, there's also more standalone sources, and those include things like furniture stores, travel websites, animal galleries, and I can use all those for reference pictures too, especially since I know Reddit isn't going to be here forever, so those are great places to start branching out with. There's also dimensions.com, which has been phenomenal in helping me understand scale. But easily one of my favorite resources so far has actually been museum websites like nationalgallery.org.uk, especially if you want to do a master study. They have over 2,000 paintings from various eras and styles, and what I adore about this particular resource is you can zoom in on some of the paintings and actually see the individual paint strokes on the canvas. That is so heckin' cool. You can actually study the physical techniques that were applied to a degree. Not completely, but like just seeing the direction the paint strokes were in is so neat. I will say though that obviously this specific museum is going to be very Eurocentric, and I'm not gonna lie, it's been difficult trying to find similarly great resources for art from other regions of the world. So if you happen to know some great non-Eurocentric art resources, please feel free to name them in the comments, not just for me, but for any fellow artists that would like those resources that might be scrolling by. But in general, there's so many places you can still find accurate and real references online. You just have to try and think beyond the main central hubs. They're out there. I promise they're out there. The internet still exists outside of apps, even if Google's done its damnedest to try and ruin that. Now, the final thing I really wanted to touch on, especially for fellow newbies out there, is that sense of unknown that comes with learning a new skill. And it's more pervasive than you think it is. Like, the reason I made a point in this video to say I've done over 70 pages of work this last year is because when I was in the middle of doing them, it did not feel like I was doing that much. Like, I'm not joking when I say I would sometimes guilt myself for not doing more, even though there was no reason for me to feel that way. The best way I have to describe this feeling is when we watch a movie with a training montage, or any one of the YouTube videos out there that talk about art progress, we see a condensed version of what we go through, right? We see the chain of events edited down for the sake of storytelling and entertainment. This video you're watching now included. I am not excusing myself from this. I am adding to that dialogue by doing this video. We don't see those in-between moments where you walk away from a drawing you hated, or those dinners where you're eating and wondering if all this time you're spending on this hobby is actually going anywhere, or those moments you're staring at the paper confused as to why 100 days in and the study you're doing now actually looks worse than one from 2 weeks ago. The closest I've seen to capturing this feeling is Nerdforge's 100-hour challenge. But even then, despite how beautiful and inspiring and helpful that video was, and I'm not exaggerating when I say those things, I actually bought their membership so I could use their PowerPoint as a guide to point to more resources like this book I am slowly going through. Even that wonderful video isn't entirely accurate about that specific sense of the unknown, and I don't know if it's possible to capture that experience. That was actually why I started recording weekly time-lapse videos, but that quickly became overwhelming and actually ended up hindering my art progress more than helping me, so I had to stop that. But even then, looking back, I don't think those actually achieved capturing that feeling either. On top of all that, a lot of us, or at least I have, been trained to seek instant gratification, right? So where we get a video that condenses a year's worth of work in 24 minutes, or whatever the time step for my video ends up being, learning a new skill takes so much longer than that. We have to fight a battle of attrition against how modern society has conditioned us to be on top of all the other questions hobbies make us ask about ourselves. My video right now cannot accurately portray this sense of being lost and wandering through this practice, even though I'm doing my damnedest as long-winded as I am right now. And that's the most difficult part about picking up art, in my opinion. Getting into art, or any creative hobby for that matter, forces you to sit down and learn about yourself as a person, including the parts of you that you don't like. or the parts of you that people around you convince you isn't worth liking. It forces you to look at your imperfections and failures and misconceptions in the face. A lot of people have a crippling fear of these things. But I can say, after this first year with art, it was 100% worth it. All of it was worth it. And those videos like the Nerd Forge video are 100% worth watching. Because at the end of the day, art videos were what finally got my butt in the chair and sticking with it. By digging deeper into art, I've rediscovered a lot about myself that I lost over the years and made connections to influences that I thought were gone from my life. I'm basically getting to know myself again, and it's been a humbling and comforting experience despite all the unknowns out there. Now, am I a good artist after only a year? No, I'll be the first to say that. No. I am not there yet, because who's good at anything after only a year? But I've made more art this year than I have my whole life, and now I know it's possible. So yeah, that's how my first year went. I'm not the artist I want to be yet. I don't even know what kind of artist I want to be yet, because I've strayed pretty far from my original subjects I wanted to learn to paint. But I'm a lot closer to that person now than I was a year ago, and I had an absolute blast doing it. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and I hope that if you've been thinking of picking up a creative hobby, any hobby, that you take this video as your sign to get going. A year can feel like a long, impossible commitment, but I promise when I say that year will go by faster than you think, and Future You will thank today's you for taking that plunge. I said in the first video, and I say it again now. Let's build ourselves up together, one day at a time.